Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me for another episode of CSM Practice, the podcast that gives you all the tactical advice and strategic insights that you need to make your SaaS business better, get more subscriptions, increase your revenue growth. And today I have Johnny Page, who's the CEO of a company called SaaS Academy. Johnny, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Fun to take our conversation on air. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Johnny, a lot of times I have customer success executives coming to the show, but every now and then I have someone like you who's not only been SaaS founder, but actually works with a lot of SaaS companies in order to help them break through the growth ceiling and have some real advice, not just from their own experience, but actually seeing what hundreds of SaaS companies are doing in order to make their subscription go higher and revenues go bigger.
In 2019, the company I was running, we went through an acquisition. It was part of a roll-up strategy. So we go from a team of 30 people to now joining a team of 250. When we're sitting down in the final days of closing that acquisition, the CEO from the private equity firm leading the acquisition asked me, hey, where do you see yourself in the new company? What role do you see yourself taking on? And I said, well, assuming that the CEO seat is taken, customer success is the place I feel like I can have the most impact on the company's growth. I can influence marketing and I can influence sales if I'm in the customer success seat. So I've always believed in my number one growth strategy is like make our existing customers wildly successful. And then we earn our right to easier sales conversations, easier marketing conversations. So I'm at home here with the CSM tribe.
If anything is going to be imparted on you, this is the episode where we talk about how can you truly attach yourself as a customer success executive to the go-to-market strategy, period.
Well, because it's also best for your individual interests. The more aligned you are with the company's goals, the more valuable you are to the company. So if you ever find yourself saying, you know what, that's not my job, which is what's happening if you're saying, you know what, if no one's ever came to you, Irit, for the amount of time that you've spent in customer success and executives you work with, for no one to ask you, hey, can you help me set up the advocacy pipeline? They would be disconnected from if company growth is a priority, how can I, as a CS executive, impact what marketing is doing and impact what sales is doing? You're out of alignment from that. So it's like better for your career. In fact, twice now I've CEO'd companies coming through customer success. Like I actually didn't found the software company I took through an acquisition. I was in a customer success role, but I was so interested in the goals of the company that I then ended up taking on the marketing team. I took on the sales team, and then I CEO'd the company and took it through an acquisition. And now today I started with Dan Martell and SaaS Academy as a head of customer success. 2 years later, I'm the CEO of the company because they don't stop. But customer success is the number one way to impact the growth of the company. So congratulations, you're in the right seat. It'd be much harder for me to coach someone in marketing to get to the CEO role. But if you'll start plugging into that and saying, how can I influence? You start to ask a lot more of these questions that like, how does customer success impact sales? Make sure that my sales team always has customers they can reference and stories they can tell that take that prospect and allow them to easily put themselves in the shoes of a winning customer using your product.
Hey, listen, a good testimonial or referral does half the job. Like the sales cycle is going to be half as fast and the conversion rates go up. Whether or not the salesperson actually shares it, so long as it's somewhere on the cloud and the customer had, like the new prospect has the ability to see it or had seen it before or have heard from someone, yep, I totally recommend it. They're already coming in with a buyer's mind. They're already convinced. Like your job is just to not screw it up at that point. It becomes that easy. And us at CS can impact that. So the reason I wanted you here, Johnny, is I read this book. It's called The Software as a Science. It was written by Dan Martell, who's a very well-known figure, has an amazing YouTube channel. Go check that out if you haven't yet. Matt
Verlack.
And then Marcel
Pettipas.
Great bunch of people. I read actually the bio of all of you guys. Quite impressive. And so if anybody that's listening here, here's what you're going to get out of this. Johnny, you and I talked about it. Basically, we're going to talk about growth methodologies and how to get to higher net retention rate. And you see, there's 3 levers, and you talk about it in your book, but maybe you can tell them what are the 3 big levers that a SaaS founders, even a CCO has in order to impact net retention rate.
It's easy to overcomplicate growth. So you can spend 10 minutes on YouTube and find hundreds and hundreds of strategies that you could use to grow your SaaS company. But we like keeping things simple. We boil this down to there's 3 levers you can pull on to grow a recurring revenue business. The first lever you can pull is you can get more customers. And that's typically the one most people love pulling. We call that one chocolate. The second lever is you can keep your existing customers for longer so you can increase your retention. A lot of times we call this one broccoli. It's not necessarily the sexiest YouTube thumbnail, but it is the vitamins. It's the backbone of a recurring revenue business, is the quality of the product. And the third lever is you can make your customers worth more. And this one people avoid like the plague. They avoid figuring out how to optimize their pricing until they absolutely have to. Now, if you're a venture-backed or institutionally funded company, you typically lean into this one more frequently because they have it down to a science. They know that pricing optimization and expansion revenue is just as much a skill to be built as retention or as customer acquisition. But those are the 3. And so we boil it down to say there's one that is the most important to focus on at any point in time. One of those levers will put the more cash into the business and impact the growth ceiling of the business more than others. And so we use that framework to identify what's the most important thing in the business. And the book unpacks like some of the top strategies to get more customers, keep them for longer, or make them worth more.
I want to say something to those who are listening right now. If you're saying, I'm in customer success, I don't impact the lever of getting new clients, or I don't have any say around pricing, so I don't know if this is relevant for me. It is relevant. And I'm going to actually double down on each one of these levers so that you understand how in customer success, even if you are in that seat, you could and should proactively work. First of all, understand these 3 levers is what your CEO is thinking about day in and day out. Every year, every quarter is thinking, which lever should I push more? And so if you understand that these are the 3 levers, you can actually ask your CEO, how are we getting into growth this year or this period even? Then you know what to press on. So let's just talk about the first one, the chocolate, having more clients. If I'm in customer success and my CEO says, listen, we're going to grow because we're going to have a slew of more clients. We're going to double down on marketing, improve our sales conversions. And I'm in the CS seat. What should I be thinking about?
One of the most impactful things you could do to affect the company's growth as a customer success manager is to help extract social proof from your existing customer base. It's way easier to grow the company when your customers are talking about the results they have than when you're talking about what you can do. In the book, we teach this framework called the customer value extractor. Look, no matter what, asking for social proof is going to be helpful. If you're not doing it at all right now, fire up the email, send it out to all your customers and ask them for reviews. Like, because what most people do, like, oh no, we need some more testimonials for the landing page on the website. And we do this one-off blast. And that is effective if you have nothing. But a much more intelligent way of going about getting social proof from your customers is to go through what we call this customer value extractor. And that is that when there's a bright spot in the customer journey, when there's a win, we then want to pair it with an ask. So for example, early on in your customer journey, you may get them to the moment of activation when they've got first value from the product. And the ask that you make at that point in the customer journey is going to be much lighter weight than it will be if you are years into it and the customer, after a quarterly business review, says, look, we've got thousands and thousands of dollars of ROI. Our asks are going to be different at that point in the customer journey. So what a customer success manager can do here is say, let me look at all of the moments, the triggers where a customer would say, hey, this was valuable. Maybe it is after a quarterly business review. Maybe it's after seeing certain usage metrics, or they just tell you, hey, we've loved that new feature. That was awesome. You got a ton of value out of it. If I knew all of the moments in the customer journey when someone was going to win, and then I could pair it with what are the asks that can escalate over time? Things like, hey, can you just leave us a review on Google? It's nice for us to like, hey, 5 minutes, go to G2 Crowd or whatever and leave us a review. And then maybe later on, you ask them for a video testimonial. So you send them a link, they fire up their video camera and they talk about before and after. Then maybe later on you ask them to be a case study or maybe even a referral. And so if I'm taking as a CSM, you just give me 100 clients and I say, hey, CEO, our growth is our priority next year. Awesome. Challenge accepted. I'm going to methodically extract tons and tons of value out of my existing customer base that my sales and marketing team can use so that we're never short on social proof, we're never short on referrals, short on references, so that our customers can prove to the market that we do the thing we say we're going to do.
For everybody that's listening, if your CEO doubles down on sales, not upsells, for example, what you should be thinking about is how can you make the sales cycle faster and how can you help them get more leads? And you can do that by establishing sort of like an advocacy pipeline. The first ask might be very small. You just answer an NPS survey with some comment. The next one would be like, oh, give us a review. The third one is share a story on our conference. The fourth one would be whatever, record a video. Well, you've already talked about it so much. This should be easy. So I don't know if I would start with a video. It's worth a try, but there's some other things that you mentioned that are very easy to do. And so, you know, what's the sad thing, Johnny, is that I work with a lot of CS executives. And you know how many times am I being asked to optimize the advocacy pipeline or even help me establish one? You know how many times?
Mm-hmm.
This is zero.
I was about to say, like, hardly ever. Yeah.
Zero.
Not because it's easy, but because it just gets missed.
With that, I want to take the other two levers that it makes sense because it does impact the net dollar retention. Maybe not net retention rate, but the net dollar retention. You mentioned price.
Lever 2 is retention, and then lever 3 is make them worth more.
So not churn, make sure they don't churn. And the other one is, well, how can you increase the lifetime value? Let's talk about the second one first, because I think that's something that, pricing, most customer success teams and the heads of customer success don't think that they have any impact on pricing. What do you think about that?
Yep.
If I'm the head of customer success, the CEO insists year over year they're going to increase pricing, or they don't increase pricing, what should we be doing?
The two levers that we focus on within pricing is, number one, just making sure that you have a pricing plan that when the customer value increases, the price of your product increases, that they're directly aligned. At times, depending on how evolved the SaaS company is, if they've got 50 employees, 100 employees, it might be more challenging. We're typically working with a little bit earlier stage, less than 50 employee company where everyone's going to have a say, or at least be considered in how this gets rolled out. And so the first process here is to make sure that from your perspective, the pricing plan that we're rolling out is directly aligned with the value that the customer is going to get. The closer aligned they are, for example, easy place to understand this is in your credit card processing fees. They're directly aligned. Hey, the more dollars you process, the more we're going to make. You process $10 in a year, we're only going to make 3% on that. You process 10 million, we're going to make more. So it's hard to go push back and argue that, like, hey, I'm paying too much here. As closely aligned as you can with your software product, align it with the value that your product delivers. So there's a few, we unpack exactly how to triangulate that in several examples in the book. But the role of a CSM would be to say, hey, to think intelligently about how is our pricing plan set up? And am I noticing that behaviors that are best for the customer are actually being disincentivized by our pricing plan? For example, if you are HubSpot or you're a CRM, you want more contacts in the system. So you might, as a CSM, be looking for, are there things that we're doing? Is our pricing plan disincentivizing people to put their contacts in the CRM? And for years it was, until then HubSpot said, you know what? We're going to allow you to put everyone in there, but then pricing is going to be based on the ones as a marketing contact. So anyone you can turn off, because the more and more customers that are in our CRM, the harder the migration becomes, the more valuable our data and our reporting is. It's paying attention from a CSM perspective to say, hey, where am I noticing that a customer is acting differently than they would normally do to solve the problem the best they possibly could, based on the pricing plan that's in place. So that would be the first one, is influencing the pricing plan. The second thing that we cover in here is how to actually roll out a price increase. So we give this exact template. It was originally taught by Patrick Campbell from ProfitWell, who just did years and years of work in pricing. We work with a lot of founders and teams that are around 5 to 10 million in annual revenue. And companies at that stage are just starting to come around to the impact of doing pricing optimization can actually have. They'll typically have hundreds and hundreds of users that are on grandfathered plans, and they're worried about changing the pricing because they want to be, those customers have been loyal to them. They want to be loyal to the customer. The reality is your product has gotten a lot better over time. And if you just play that over years, how inflation continues to impact, you're just not going to be able to not learn this skill. You want to build a $50 million company, $100 million company, you're going to have to learn how to adjust your price as your product improves. Do exactly what we teach in the chapter. It's this email template that says, hey, over the time that since the last time we increased your price, We've made all these improvements in the product. On X date, whether it's 3 months in the future or 6 months in the future, we are going to change your price from X to Y. You give them notice ahead of time. Hey, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, it's going to happen. If for whatever reason this is going to cause a disruption to your business, we want to know about it. And most of the time when you frame it, here's the value we've increased, it's going to happen out in the future. It's not happening overnight. And if there's any reason why this would have a negative impact on you, we want to know. Looking forward to the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever together. That typically is going to, for 95% of your users, there's going to be no pushback. Hey, thanks. Awesome. Appreciate the heads up. For 5%, they'll actually take you up on it. They'll have a conversation and you can work out the customization to your deal. That's a way to shed those grandfathered plans and roll out a price increase in a way that still preserves a relationship. So those are the two. And the last thing we cover in here is the ability to add professional services to your organization. I love, especially in early stage SaaS, using professional services as a R&D. We teach how to go from, if you have part of the customer's workflow that our product doesn't currently do right now, why don't we charge them to do it for them manually? And when we've done that 10 times, 100 times, now we can start to recognize a pattern and we can build software with a lot higher degree of confidence that this is how it needs to work because it's been refined manually. Whereas typically the product managers make their money based on, there's a lot of ambiguity around what should we actually build. Well, if you had the time and the monetization, the strategy to say actually make money for that R&D, product managers would get a lot more time to see what truly needs to be built, what can be solved through services and what can be solved through product. We unpack how professional services has got a bad rep in SaaS for a lot of years, but it actually can be a profitable way to build an incredible product. So those are the three levers within pricing that we unpack.
Two things I think where customer success can attach themselves to help with that go-to-market strategy. One, impact the decisions around the modality of pricing. Like you said, well, maybe we do a consumption model somewhere, or we increase the price as you get more and more value. So based on modules and outcomes, essentially. Secondly, you mentioned an uptick in price year over year and changing the pricing fees over time, like increasing. And I actually had a few customers where they would actually do an uptick in price every single year. And they have a very specific playbook that they go through, some pushback, some not. And customer success managers are typically the ones that handle that conversation if they own the renewals. And so that's another thing, like having a very strong playbook and training for your CSMs before doing that price uptick announcement and coach them on how to handle objections, I think is really key.
Yeah, it's to know that it's coming ahead of time and to give them a heads up and be able to handle the conversation. It's the ability to have a customer realize the ROI they have in the product. A lot of times it's obvious to us and it's not obvious to the customer. So the more frequently you're going to increase the price, just the better you have to be at that ROI realization conversation. These are sometimes like 4 and 5 years that are going by in between price increases. And so it's obvious you can get by with just an email saying, look at all we've done over the last 5 years. We're going to right size the pricing. The more frequently you do it, you just got to know that I'm going to set myself up for that conversation to make sure that it's a easy, heck yeah, there's continues to be more value delivered to the client and I'm not creating a headache of churn. But then there's also, we teach in here how to calculate your break even point. Like I remember years ago, I couldn't remember the first time I was on the receiving end of a price increase. I was using a product at the time, it was called Chargeify. Today, they've been acquired by Maxio as a subscription billing system. I remember I got a 60-day notice that our price is going to go up by 400%. You got to have customers churning left and right. I ended up moving off the platform. You can do is you can work through, you say, hey, if we're going to increase every customer's price by 400%, how many do we need to keep just to break even? And it's a lot easier for me to support 100 high-paying clients and 1,000 low-paying clients. Their support costs have gotten so out of hand, and the migration to move a customer onto the platform, they just decided we're going to move up market. And so we only need to keep 20% of our clients. And if 80% churn, the price increase of the 20 is our break point. So knowing what your break-even point is helpful. And I think even if you're a CSM, for many of those listening here, if you're tuning into a podcast trying to get to the top of your game, my guess is you have some entrepreneurial spirit in you somewhere. You say, hey, one day I might do this. So take advantage of being in someone else's sandbox. And if the next time your CEO of the company says, hey, we're going to run a price increase. Do the math on your own customer base and say, okay, how many need to stick around if this price increase was going to reduce churn or was going to increase churn? Some people were going to leave, and we just knew this was probably going to price them out of the market. Just figure out how many it is and come up with your own break even and say, okay, hey, you know what, as I roll this out, if I can keep more than that break even, I've been a force for good in our company. There's profits higher, and you can kind of understand the mechanics around why would a company increase their price on such a frequent cadence.
Wow, what a brilliant idea. I'd say if you're a customer success executive, always do that break even analysis and communicate it back to the ELT. Say, hey, listen, we're going to run this price uptick. We are expecting a 10% increase in immediate churn, but that's minimum because going forward, that will allow us to grow and show the impact to the CEO. So when you get that higher churn, nobody sneezes here. Like, align expectations ahead of time. I don't think this is a nice to have. I think it's a must have if you're a CS executive. I want to talk about if the CEO thinking about increasing prices because it's going to add additional capabilities and expand the product capabilities and the use cases. You talked about instead of going directly the product roadmap route, they should lean into professional services and potentially allowing this service manually. There's another customer success place in this scenario. I just want to amplify that. I have other interviews where somebody breaks down the process of customer story time, sharing the feedback of using that service or what use cases, what did it solve for the client. We talked about feedback earlier in this discussion. So you as a customer success team has the fiduciary responsibility to actually sharing customer stories and even bringing some of these customers to say, what did that open up? How important is it? What worked? What didn't? Before we even take the initial step to design what it would look like if we were to automate this inside our product.
100%. It's funny, I read the number of companies that say we bring up professional services, like, oh no, we'd never do that. But it's hiding inside their customer success department. They are doing it, they're just not charging for it. And so what we propose here is like dig into, especially if you're a CEO and you're not exactly sure what goes into the headcount of your customer success team, and you've shied away from professional services, because for a long time, any revenue that came from professional services in a SaaS company was devalued when you evaluated the company. So we tried to stay away from it. What happened was we just like stopped monetizing it. We stuck it into customer success. Now we have these bloated customer success headcounts and scope creep around what is truly onboarding and what should be a more premium service. Many of our customers would actually pay more for a white glove approach if you would just get me to the outcome. So this is teaching a methodology to say, how do we recognize when services, when human-to-human interactions can help accelerate the customer outcome, and let's do it frequently enough and then build some tooling around it so we get some margin in it, which is essentially what your software product does, is taking these workflows that used to be manual, and we found a way to do it much more consistently through a software product, and we create a lot more margin. Professional services should be seen as the R&D department for these growing platforms, and you just end up building, like, the hit rate of building a great solution after having done it manually through your services department goes up significantly. We're not guessing anymore with our roadmap. A lot more of what we build ends up creating ROI for the customer and ROI for the business.
Let's talk about the broccoli, the third lever, just keeping your customers, man, table stakes. Clearly, this is the number one charter in many companies for the customer success team. Talk to me about that. What have you seen in your experience as a head of customer success, both a software company and a services company? What are you seeing? And then what are you seeing in your academy with all these SaaS founders? What works, what doesn't? How do they approach it?
But we focus first on activation. That's not going to be news to anyone here. It's like we got to get our customer to first value as quickly as possible. Then we talk about the customer health index. This was what Dharmesh Shah and HubSpot popularized. We give a much more early stage focus on how to start with this. A lot of times people like hear Dharmesh talk about the customer health index and then they just way overbuild it. We teach you how to start simple on getting a mechanism so you can forecast who's at risk and get ahead of it. And then we talk about the customer value extractor. But when we think about reducing churn, I have this model or this framework I work through that boils down churn happens because one of three things is wrong, and we work through the priority in which to fix them. So the source of churn is actually starts in our sales process, and that there's a mismatch in expectations. Customers churn, particularly early on in the process, anything less than 6 months, because what they bought and what they got, there was a big gap between them. So we need to go and unpack, if you're seeing a lot of churn in your business, we need to go say, hey, what does our positioning look like? What is the level of commitment that a client has when they sign up? We have to make sure that the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing. And so when you look at the pain associated with adopting a product, for example, adopting HubSpot's enterprise suite is very painful for an organization. It sucks for a long time before it gets better. So there's a setup fee. There's an annual commitment, which makes the pain of staying the same. So if you're going to stay the same, you're going to purchase the product at the point of sale, and now you get to show up to your kickoff call. When you start to understand the scope of changing this thing over, you have the choice of like, just let all of that investment go to waste because you've already paid the setup fee and you have the annual contract, or you can go through the pain of changing. And so the second thing we look at in sales is there enough commitment from the client? And then the third one is, how are we handing off from sales to customer success? You spend all this time building authority and trust with the salesperson, and then sometimes we just throw them over the fence with very cold start. And so the customer is like, has to start all over with someone in customer success, and we kill a lot of the momentum there. So if you have high churn, the first place I'd look at is how are we selling the product?
Defining the right ICP and then handing over, setting the right expectations, selling to the right accounts or the right companies, and then the handover so that the CSM doesn't get them cold. It's a better experience for the customer too. Was there a third thing?
I would double click just a little bit. It's not just your ICP, it's the positioning of the product. Think about, what are they comparing this to? What am I used to? Like when I say CRM, what picture gets painted in your head? And what are we assuming it's going to be? Sometimes we're setting expectations incorrectly because we're not aware of the positioning. We could be talking to the ideal customer, but the comparisons that we make cause us to have a misaligned expectations when they start on the product. So yeah, the three in sales to go look for are your positioning, which includes your ICP. It is the level of commitment that a client has at the point of sale. Just remember, the pain of staying the same has to be greater than the pain of changing. So the more behavior change your product requires, the more commitment they're going to need at the point of sale. And that might mean you close less, but they're going to stick around. So you need to look at it holistically. And the third one is the sales to customer success handoff. Those are typically the three contributors. If sales is contributing to churn, and that's where I'd start first. I'm starting with, you got to start earlier in the customer journey to go solve it. If we're seeding churn in our sales process, no matter how great our product looks like, we get through all the product resources in the world at it, which is the most expensive way to solve churn is through our product. It's not going to solve the problem because it's upstream. So we got to start at the beginning of the customer journey and triage churn starting in sales. So that covers sales. The second one is in customer success. And for your crowd, this is going to be table stakes, but I'm laying out the 9 sources of churn and the order in which you should work through. So in customer success, there's 3. There's our onboarding, our activation. Do we actually get them to their desired outcome in a reasonable time frame? You've got to be ruthless. Not every customer is the same. Your onboarding playbook is not for you. It is for your customer. And it's very, very easy for a customer success organization as it matures to become more and more us-centric than customer-centric. It'll show up in your churn numbers. You'll think, oh, it's a little bit more efficient for us if we teach the platform in this order, if they'll adopt this feature and then this feature and then this feature. You don't get to decide. You're changing that, your customer's organization. So you have to look at in onboarding, making sure it stays customer-centric. Do we get them to first value into their desired outcome in a reasonable time frame? And the second 2 are reactive support and our proactive support. And so these just come down to, when a customer has a problem, how quickly are we getting them a resolution? Do they have to talk to a human, or do we get them answers through an efficient and a good experience in our help center with our documentation and chat and all that? And then if for whatever reason there is a break in the system, are we quick at resolving it? And the third one is our proactive support, knowing that your customer is not waking up every day thinking about your product and the problems that it solves in their organization. You are. So as you discover more and more ways to deliver value to that customer, to leverage the software, if you notice a gap in how they're using it and what you know is possible, what drives the most ROI, you have an obligation as their partner to reach out and help close that gap. If you do that well, you offset a ton of churn. You get seen as someone who's a trusted ally. So that's customer success for your crowd. That's probably like where the majority of the focus is at. And then last but not least, we get to product. And your product comes down to the functionality, the usability, and the reliability of the product. If you do those 3 things well, you have high retention. But if it's got to be functional, it's got to do the thing that it needs to do. It's got to be usable. It's got to do it in a way that the customer understands it. They can do it. It's intuitive. It's not 40 steps when it should be 5. and it's got to be reliable. I log in and I go do the thing. You've got to deliver on it. Can't intermittently down or deliver inconsistent results. So what happens in SaaS organizations is a lot of times, especially if it's technical leadership, they like solving churn from product to sales. So they work from product first. It's always a product problem. Then they go to customer success and they say if it's a customer success problem, then they consider maybe it's a sales and positioning problem. The challenge is if you solve first the product becomes overbuilt. And now it's even more confusing to support, which makes it harder for us to deliver on number two, which makes it even harder to position. We kind of become everything for everyone. We've built options everywhere. And so it's important to start first in sales and triage churn through how we're selling, then how we're supporting in our customer success, and then get to product and only solve problems with product solutions, and not we're trying to solve a customer success problem with a product solution or trying to solve a sales problem. That's how you can think through. I call that the churn buster cheat sheet. It's a framework to work through of the 9. But you do those things and you will absolutely have high net retention.
Appreciate you actually outlining all these churn reasons. It totally resonates with me, by the way. I've been working with SaaS companies for the last decade, doing just that, thinking about, oh, what causes your churn and what should we do? And what I found is like the way that we know how to deal with churn is a lot of times I found that there's no substantiated research about this, by the way, anyone. This is just my experience of working with dozens of companies. So my aha moment around this is that it's not order sometimes, but rather if you have a significant churn rate, meaning 30, 40, 50% churn, it happens, that means that you have a product issue and you actually tackle that first. If your churn rate is between 20 and 10%, it's not great, and your team is super reactive, you want to fix your support system first so it's way more efficient. There's not like a huge backlog. We can give a better experience. So when do you actually fix onboarding? Well, analyze your churn. Is most of them churning because they never activated, or that most of the churn happens in year one? Surely it's an onboarding issue. And if it's not either of the above, then go tackle customer success, adoption, all that. But you're right. A lot of times companies don't know where to tackle the churn issue first. And they unfortunately go fix the product and overbuild it when they just need to fix the onboarding. They don't know these signs. And so that's kind of like my 2 cents on it. And again, there's no substantiated research around this. This is what I've seen. I feel like a lot of time, so many SaaS founders, especially with younger companies that never done customer success before, or even somebody that's being promoted internally within the company to all of a sudden own customer success, there's so many like blind spots. And I feel like that's where the SaaS Academy, for example, or even the program that I'm building right now could help. It's what you don't know that you don't know sometimes. You're thinking that you know, you're doing best you can, you read some books, whatever. But if anybody's here getting a lot of aha moments, is because tribal knowledge and experience with multitude of companies is what makes you an expert. So maybe you could share a little bit before we complete the interview, like, would you recommend founders that have a retention problem join your SaaS Academy, and what can they expect? Are they going to work on those 3 levers, I suppose?
That's certainly a part of it. So when we work with founders, and typically our sweet spot is working with founders that are around $1 million in revenue all the way up to 30. The majority of them are between 1 and 10. What we're going to work on is first off, identify what is the 3 levers. And we call that like assessing their growth engine with the ability to increase monthly recurring revenue on a regular basis. Of the things that we can measure, we can pretty quickly identify the bottleneck. Simple, and it's, in fact, we teach this in the book, in the growth engine. Is it getting more customers? Is it keeping them for longer? Or is it our monetization strategy? But there's 4 things that influence, they're a little bit harder to show up in a scorecard. The first one is your strategy. So we'll assess how mature is your ability to like articulate the vision and the strategy of the business to your team. The second one is your product. No surprises there. Create value for our customers. The next is our operations. So looking at how quickly can we pick a vision for the company and realize it? Like, do we align the team? Do we manage our financial and human resources well to realize the vision of the company? And the last one is our team. Do we bring great team members in? So we call that a spot check: strategy, product, operations, and team. Those influence the growth engine. It's harder to show up on a scorecard. So when a founder comes into our world, we just go through an assessment one-on-one with a coach. We go through an assessment and look at what are the 1 to 3 most important projects to focus on over the next 90 days. We do an annual plan. We sit down and say, hey, where do you want to be a year from now? And then we chunk it down into quarterly focuses, and we work with our founder. We got tons and tons of resources. The book is a fraction of what we actually have in campus, but we start to work through these projects with experts, and we have a large community of over 500 founders in our program. And so you put in an ecosystem. I liken this to the same thing a VC does when they invest in a portfolio company. Is they're going to give them experts and advisors. They're going to pair them with playbooks that have worked for the rest of their portfolio as well, so they don't make the same mistakes that others have. They're going to connect them with their portfolio founders, so they're connected with other people who are going the same journey, and they're going to open up their vendors and advisors that have helped serve their companies before. And so SaaS Academy is like getting access to that ecosystem without having to give up the equity, which, because for most founders, they're looking for that level of support. So they go to incubators, they go to accelerators. They say, hey, I don't want to have to go to the school of hard knocks and learn these lessons the hard way. I'd rather talk to someone who's been there and done that before. And at SaaS Academy, it's a lot less about a single person and a lot more about the ecosystem we put them in, the methodology. So our goal was, hey, founder doesn't have to take our word for it. Check out the book. If what we teach in the book resonates, we give it away. You just got to pay for shipping. You go to softwarebook.com. If what we teach in the book resonates, there's a whole lot more where that came from in working in our academy. But yeah, that's the best place to start, is checking out the methodology. It's why we wrote it, so that those who resonate can quickly find what we're about. There you go.
Everyone that's listening, this is not a sponsored video, just so you know, I'm not getting paid for it. But the reason I wanted to bring you is the book is killer. Just last week, I talked to another CS executive, and he was like, yeah, I'm reading the book. I was like, you're reading the book? He's like, yeah, I'm reading the book. I love it. I'm halfway through. I'm going to finish it this week. I'm like, wow. So the book is not just for founders. He had nothing but amazing things to say about the book, and I agreed with everything. And secondly, a couple of years back, I actually was invited to the SaaS Academy to be one of those advisors to your SaaS founders. I was just like blown away from the quality of level of the sessions that 𝘧𝘪𝘳𝘪𝘦 back then used to do. I was like, wow, look at all these models and all the things. I got so inspired. It actually up-leveled the own way that I present my ideas. And this is kind of like a thank you for that.
Thanks, Irit. It's been awesome. The things you've taught still live on in SaaS Academy, and just appreciate all the support you've given to SaaS Academy over the years and on the book. It's awesome.
Action items. Go download the book or pay for shipping and get the book. I promise you, it's going to be worth the shipping cost.
It's $10. You can go on Amazon and buy it. I think it's $30. If you go to softwarebook.com, it's $10. You just pay for shipping. There's a reader's portal with a ton of resources in there to help you actually go implement everything that we talk about in the book. And then if you want the fast pass, you can jump on a call with our team and see if it's a good fit for SaaS Academy. But yeah, softwarebook.com.
Get the book, pay for the shipping. It's $10. You don't like it, they'll give it back to you. But then you get even more resources. And if you're a SaaS founder or know a SaaS founder that can benefit from this, have them download the book or ship the book to them, and then get on the assessment. I think it's interesting. If you're stuck, you're not growing for 2-3 years, maybe this is just the one call that you need to get an understanding of where you need to focus. Sometimes that alone has a magnitude impact on your next 5 years. So thank you, Johnny, for sharing all of that.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And with that, everyone, this is a wrap. I'll see you at the next podcast episode.